Welcome to Style Masterclass, the podcast that teaches women to look stylish and feel confident so that they can show up ready to conquer and slay no matter what size they are. I'm your host, Miss J. You ready? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Style Masterclass Podcast. I have a very special guest for you all today. And this is not part of our Shit My Mama Said podcast series, although I'm hoping to get Trudi back to do one of those episodes. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Today, I have an amazing guest on. I hinted at her name already, but I'm going to have her introduce herself in a second here. She's written an amazing book, y'all. I've met her in person. I've seen her speak. I know her heart. It's just what an amazing human. And I'm just so excited, especially for the entrepreneurs on the call or the leaders of different organizations. And y'all are lady bosses. So I know y'all are running things or you own the things or both. And this conversation today is going to be so crucial for you as you think about where you want to take your business over the next year or years, decades, hopefully for most of us. So Trudi, please take it away. Please introduce yourself, darling.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I am Trudi Lebron. I am a coach, entrepreneur, and newly author, which is very exciting. I'm still getting used to that title and, that kind of identity as an author. But I run a consulting and coaching firm called the Institute for Equity-Centered Coaching. And we do a couple of things, including training coaches and leaders. And we train people in a style of coaching that we call equity-centered coaching, and is really designed to help people broaden the scope of the tools that they have to provide coaching and facilitation to the folks that they serve. We also do consulting. So we work with a number of companies, some of them in the coaching industry, some of them that we all know and love, and others who are, just nonprofits or schools or, other folks that we work with who are trying to bring more equity and anti-racism into their business practice, which really impacts a couple of different and very critical things in a business. One is client outcomes. The other is company culture. And then the last thing that really transforms as a result of that kind of work is just like the people in themselves. Like there's a huge personal development component to anti-racism work if you're doing it holistically. So that's what I do.
You're like, that's in a nutshell, right? Which is like, let's unpack that though, because you said a few things that I think I'm sure we could spend hours on. So probably. But let's start with the equity word, because I think it's thrown around a lot. And some of you might listening might even we have cued an eye roll from you. You're like, oh, equity, right? But I think it's worth actually talking about what that is versus what the buzzword hype version has become.
Yeah, I love that question. I have, especially over the last couple of months, have found myself on more than one occasion very frustrated over the inclusion of words like equity and anti-racism and diversity into just kind of day-to-day, the way that we talk, the way that we talk about life, the way that we talk about work, the way that we talk about justice, right? It does start to feel very performative. Like people are just like, oh, this is inequitable. This is equitable. That's racist. This isn't racist, without a real deep analysis for what any of those words really mean. And oftentimes you hear them being used interchangeably or just kind of strung along in a sentence, like, oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as though that is just one thing. And the fact is that those three things have very different definitions, and they all have a variety of practices that people employ to try to get all diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, I'm glad that more people than ever are talking and exploring about these things, or talking about these things and exploring these things. But I do wish that people would slow down and really take their time to understand what these things mean and how we achieve them and why.
Yeah, so it's at a base level, because in law school, at least I had really great professors who made huge distinctions between the idea of equality versus equity. Yes. And sometimes we use, again, these words interchangeably. And even in my work as a style coach, I'm like, style and fashion are not the same thing. Let's make sure we have the same base understanding so that when we have conversations, we know where we're coming from. So like, I know, again, we could spend hours, but give us like the mini version of what the nuances are if you can.
Yeah. I mean, quickly, and I think that this is the most basic and also best way to understand these things, is that equal is about the same, right? About getting everybody the same thing. If it's equal, everybody gets the same amount and piece of whatever it is they're looking to get, right? Like if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, like I did, the whole thing was about everybody's the same, treat everybody the same, don't see color, right? That was where we were.
We did Project Self-Esteem in my elementary school, which was huge on the equality, color blindness thing. Yeah.
And that's really easy to wrap your head around. You're like, oh yeah, sure. Everybody gets the same thing. And so we have grown up with that and really internalized that is what the goal is. And that's what we should be doing. But equity is actually not interested in everybody getting the same thing. Equity is interested in about everybody getting to the same places, right? Everybody getting access to the things that they want and deserve as humans, right? To be able to thrive. And just if we think about it, it makes total sense that not everybody needs the same thing to get to the same place, right? If Judith and I are driving to the grocery store and I live 10 miles away from the grocery store and Judith lives 20 miles away from the grocery store, we're going to the same place, but the way to get there is going to be different. One person has a longer drive to get there, right? And so equity is about that. Equity is about looking at, well, what are the goals? What are life outcomes that we want people to, have, or that people should have access to just because they're human, right? And then how do we help people get there in the ways that they need the support, not in the ways that like everybody else just gets because we're equal. So that's the difference. Equal, everybody get the same thing. Equity, everybody gets what they need.
Oh, I love that. So, I mean, this is like a very human-centered approach, right? Ooh. Whereas sometimes when we're talking about making things equal, it's about the organization's resources to make things equal, a business's resources to make things equal versus equity, which is needs-based. So we're talking like human to human, which is a completely different approach. So you talked about 3 levels where like equity makes a difference. Let's circle back to that. Tell us about that, like sort of first level. Because now we have the same understanding. Let's dive in a little bit.
Yeah. So the very first level and the level that we try to support people with as we're facilitating, changes and these kind of integrations, right? This kind of integrating this understanding into our life is really the intrapersonal level. So the individual, the changes that are made in a person themselves, right? Like intrapersonally or even interpersonally between two people, right? Very basic. And so what we try to help people understand at that level is to really like kind of consider bias, right? Consider assumptions, consider things like self-determination, like people's ability to decide for themselves what they want and what their goals are and how they should live, and starting to unwind a lot of the programming that vast majority of people have, right? I mean, let's just face it, everybody has, unless you have done real intentional work to already unwind it. We're just like a result of all of the programming that we have been given by our parents, our communities, our families, the media, religion, like all these systems, right?
Yep.
We're just a combination of like all these inputs that we've gotten. And so the first level in equity work or anti-racism work is to start to unwind that and to start to really have to confront yourself. Like, what do I think? What do I believe? What judgments am I making that I'm holding other people to that aren't their values or aren't their worldviews, right? That is totally coming from me. So that is really powerful work.
It is really powerful work. And I'm like thinking of like the natural objections that would come up, right? So we have folks who are probably listening and they're like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but tell me why this matters to like a larger organization? Like, how does that even matter if like each individual person is doing this work? What's the bigger picture? Why should we care?
Yeah, the reason that we should care is because we're not relating, unless we have done that, we're not really relating to people fully. Like the relationships that we have are really superficial, or they can be very superficial. They're not really connected. We create goals and objectives that are based on values and standards that we don't actually agree with, but we haven't taken the time to recognize that we don't agree with those things. We just like bought in because that's what everybody else is doing, or we feel like that's what success looks like, or that's what beauty looks like, or that's what fashion looks like, right? Like all these things we're given like, oh, this is the right, quote unquote, right way to be, or this is what it looks like. And everybody's like trying to orient their life and their decisions based on those standards, based on those scripts. But when you start to unwind it, you really become free. It's liberation work. Like you really start to liberate yourself between who you are, what you believe, how you want to show up in the world, whether that's like how you want to show up energetically or like physically, what you look like, what you wear, right? Like all of these things, you take all your control back. And so imagine working in a community of people where everybody's like just themselves and like fully liberated. That's radical shit right there. Can we curse here?
Yeah, we curse. Yeah, we have a big old E rating.
Great.
Yeah, no, welcome. You're fine. But I love that because I mean, like the parallels between our work is so similar. Like when people first come into my world and my program, a lot of it is us like sniffing out bullshit rules that you were handed, that programming. Like, you know, people's mamas told them some fascinating shit, right? Just like people in a professional world or their career when they were new in their job. Well, here's the rules of how to be. This is what professionalism looks like. Right? This is what beauty looks like. This is how, you know, whatever the standards are for whatever realms we're in.
Totally.
And I'm always like, this is how the revolution starts, y'all. Like we start to sniff out the bullshit rules. And then but that's individual first. And then the ripple effect starts to affect the organizations that we're in or wherever humans gather.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
So good. So what would you say to someone who, let's say, I have two questions. So first, let's talk about people who are within a larger organization. Like, how do they even begin to start? Definitely, they should read your book for sure. Just going to plug that right there for sure. Yes. But even like the bigger organizations, people are within those. I have a lot of clients who are doctors, who are lawyers, who work with like bigger corporate. I'll just put that in air quotes, right? Whatever that means to people. Let's talk about those folks. Like, what would we say to them about how to start to sort of affect this change within their organizations?
Yeah. So it does 100% start with like making the changes to yourself, talking to people. This is like slow work, unfortunately, right? It's not like, oh, you can just say this or buy this workshop or like this product, you know what I mean? And like you have a transformed business or company or team or whatever. It really does take time. So starting with you, making sure that you're in the right place for the work that you want to do in the world and like the person that you want to be, right? Sometimes we're working in places where we just can't be our best selves because the system, like the structure isn't willing to change and you don't have the power to change it. But what you do have the power to do is change your environment. So like that is, you know, those are decisions that people are making every day. If you do have the power to change the organization, right, that's likely going to come by enrolling other people in this vision for what is better. So sharing other ways of doing things, calling people out or calling people in on like misalignment, right? So if the company says they value X, but they behave in this way, this other way, just pointing it out, you know, and not necessarily like, you know, causing a big upset, right? Because you can't, that is a strategy, but in my experience, that's a less effective strategy than starting with. That's usually something that you should do after you have called attention to it and it's not working. Then you can organize more, what is called more direct action. But at first, just kind of pointing out like this misalignment or hypocrisy is, oh, we say this, like, but why do we do this? Or the policy is this or the protocol is that, but this is how we execute it. Why can we fix it? Like really start to just point out, we say we're a progressive company, we say we're an equitable company, but we have these non-compete clauses in our contracts, for example, right? Like pointing those things out to just be like, yo, WTF, you know what I mean? Like what's going on? And just started, and then slowly gathering a community of people who want to call for change. Now, if you're the entrepreneur, this is a totally different conversation because you can step up and create the change in your company, right? So you actually have power to make different policy changes, to create different procedures for how you hire or like evaluate employees or things like that, right? You have completely different tools at your disposal.
Yeah. And okay. So, there's like a few things like, but I'll try to like not get overexcited. Let me bring it back. There's one thing that you said, and you changed the phraseology. And I think this is really kind of good to circle back to. You said calling people out versus calling people in.
Yeah.
And I think, after George Floyd was murdered, we saw a lot of calling out, and I think rightfully so. But we also saw some ineffective calling out, right? So let's talk about like sort of the nuance of that and how to be more effective with whatever tool we choose to use.
Yeah, I think the first thing is like really understanding what your goal is when you're trying to decide how to go about something. I never want to tell someone, oh, you should call someone out or you should do it this way or that way. Like, or to critique how someone else did it, right? Like, I don't know all the nuances and all the thoughts and position that any person who has done something in the past, like, I don't know all the things that led them to that choice. So I'm not into like critiquing, whether someone should have done it one way or another. I can point out, if you choose this may happen, that may happen. If you go about it this way, you might be more or less effective, right? So just overall, the general understanding of calling out versus calling in is that a call out is public, right? It is direct, it's public, it's loud, right? Like it is available to be seen and is meant to like call attention. I hate the word shame, but like it does, some of it uses like relying on the feeling of shame, right? That will be evoked in someone else to put pressure on them to change it. Right.
Yeah.
So that is calling out. Calling in is typically, again, typically more personal, a little lower key. It might still be public, but the language that used is typically a little bit softer. Like when we're looking at a call out versus a call in, something that is the language is a little softer and inviting, right? Is more likely to be designated as like a call in. So, and that is the tone of that is way more to educate, right? It's like to educate, to point out that there was a mistake made. It gives a little bit more grace typically to the person that is being called in to restore harm or fix it. So there's just a little more spaciousness in that for like how someone is going to feel. So those are the differences. Calling out is much more public and direct and aggressive, for lack of a better term. And I don't mean aggressive in a bad way, just like the energy behind it is really direct, whereas the call-in is more inviting.
And I want to point out to everyone, right? I don't want you to hear Trudi say that one is right and one is wrong, because that's not what she's saying at all, guys. Like,
no, I do both. I'll call people. I have called many people out, typically after I have tried to call them in or other people have tried to call them in. I do a lot of kind of educating and talking about things that have happened in the spirit of education, like kind of breaking down, like last year or the year before, Rachel Hollis like had a thing happen, right? And so like I was on.
I think you were getting your nails done, and then something popped off, And I remember you being in your car and I was like,
I was so upset.
Yeah.
I was so upset. And like, people were like, oh, like that is a call out. Yeah, it is. But also like Rachel Hollis is a public figure, like when people, if you're a public figure to some extent, like those kinds of things are gonna garner public outrage. You know what I mean? So like, that's much different than like my neighbor. If I have a grievance with my neighbor and nobody knows who my neighbor is, not a public person, and I get on Instagram and start complaining about something that they did, and like calling a lot of attention to it, but I haven't crossed the street and been like, hey, like, do you mind not mowing your lawn at 6:00 in the morning on a Monday? Like, we find a better time to do that. I don't know. Just an example. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very different when we're talking about like private people. And that's actually one of the things that like I've been exploring a lot more now, because there is this like really thin line between calling someone out and cancel culture. And cancel culture is extremely toxic. It is trending in this direction that is really toxic. And so I'm doing a lot of thinking and writing and kind of trying to understand the psychological and the social psychological impacts of cancel culture, right? And I just see like, I'm nervous about like how that is like kind of evolving.
Oh, no. And I actually was going to segue there. And I'm glad that you did, because I hear, from so many fellow entrepreneurs and colleagues, like they want to do this work. They want to do the anti-racism work. They want to lean in. They want to like, where are my biases? Where are my blinders? Where is it?
Yeah.
And start to do the work. But they're terrified of being canceled.
Totally.
And they're terrified of doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I think we all are to a certain degree. Like, even I've said boneheaded things that I'm like, could have did that better. I could have did a better job there. I think we were in a meeting together last month and I was speaking. You're like, use the mic. People might be hearing impaired. Use the mic. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. I got to be more cognizant of that. Like, we're not going to get this 100% right, folks. But
no.
Like, what would you say to those who are a little nervous about being called out or being canceled? Or both?
Yeah. What is the thing to be nervous about is, or if you experience nerves, it is that nervousness that's going to cause you to be making mistakes, right? Because the nervousness is going to prevent you from getting support, and it's going to like just kind of make you want to opt out. But you can learn all these things. We can learn all these things, right? We can learn how to be more equitable. We can learn to be inclusive. But what's more important is that we learn to communicate in ways that if we make a mistake or if someone finds offense in something that we have said, that we have the tools to like repair that, right? That is the most important thing. It's not that you're going to learn to never make a mistake. It's that if a mistake is made, you're going to be confident in your ability to connect with the person, to apologize appropriately, to learn something, to do better next time, and to leave that person feeling seen and, and whole. Now, and to know the difference between when that's worth it and when people are just being assholes.
Okay, I love that you said that, because it happens sometimes, right? We got the cookies, right? Like, I get trolled all the time about the size of my body and how I am promoting, unhealthy standards, blah, 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 which is so funny because if anyone knew me, that's like the furthest from the truth, right? So I could defend against that. I could try to like understand what that person's doing, but somebody posted, and it was funny. It was mean, but it was really funny. She posted this, I had a purple coat on, and she posted this like meme Giphy of this like monster. It's like fat purple monster doing this little dance. It was funny. I was being trolled, but it was so funny. Like, do I need to spend the time reaching out to understand that person's perspective? No, y'all. I deleted. I giggled. And if you're listening, I love you. That was funny as fuck. Please don't do that again. But it was funny. Like, right? I'm not going to reach out to that person. I'm just going to delete. I'm going to roll. Right. Like, some people are just assholes. But there's a time when like, hey, use the mic. There might be people who are hearing impaired. Or, hey, Judith, there's something you said on that one podcast that gave me a pause. you might want to rethink that, or you might use like more inclusive language. Like, hell yeah, I'm here for that. I'm here for that.
Totally. That's a huge part of it. Like knowing the difference, right? My kind of baseline is if someone's not interested in a relationship and like restoring the relationship, then I'm not interested in going back and forth. Like I'm not going to like be jumping through hoops to coddle people or to, like sometimes people just want to say that they don't agree with you and they're like, peace out. Like they drop it on your timeline and they're like gone, right? Now it's different if someone's like been in your community for a while and you recognize their name or they're a client and they say, hey, you said this thing and like that felt really misaligned. I'm the first person to be like, what do you need? Let's get on the phone. Like, actually we had someone reach out to us last year after an email went out. It was around this time last year, I think. And the email that went out was written by a member of our team. And it was like asking people, inviting people to consider joining us and applying for our program. But there was something about the tone of the email that communicated to people that all we work with is like white folks, and that white folks somehow are only doing this work because they feel guilty. That is not what we believe. And we work with people of all identities, but there was something about a sentence in the email that was totally misaligned. And even when I read it, I was like, oh, I wouldn't have said it like that, right? I wrote an email and sent it to the whole list, even people who didn't open that email. And I said, here's this email went out. Here is what it said. Doesn't matter who wrote it. Like I'm in charge, this company represents me and my beliefs. Like I apologize. Here's how we're going to do better to make sure that things like this don't slip again. Right. I didn't have to do that. We like maybe only 2 people reached out of like thousands of people, right? 2 people reached out and was like, hey, this email feels funny. And I saw it and I was like, yeah, they're right. And so instead of just acting like it didn't happen, I called attention to it, even to people who hadn't seen it.
Yeah. And like y'all, sometimes we're going to have to write emails where we say, so sorry, or thank you for your patience with me as I get some language around this. I have found, and I'm guest teaching a particular certification, and we're talking about different disparities and the intersection of different things. And some people are like, I don't even have words for this. I'm like, that's okay. Yeah. Sometimes we're not going to have language around these things. Like we'll get the language and we're going to be fumbling. And sometimes we're going to have to just ask for people's patience and say sorry. It's okay.
And I will say though, my position, and this may be, people might disagree with me, but my position 100% is that if you are a coach or if you are trying to be a coach, that the core outcome of your work is to help facilitate life transitions of other people, right? That is what coaching is. And I have said this many times, one of the biggest indicators in people's life outcomes are identity-based. They relate to our race, to our zip code, and the way that like disparities or privileges interact with those things, right? Therefore, I believe that every coach should be learning these things.
Agree.
Right? Like
100%.
Because they directly impact your job, like the outcome of your work. So a baseline understanding of equity, of trauma, of identity, of bias, right? Like you don't have to go and become an expert or an anti-racism facilitator, right? I get on the calls with people sometime and they're like, oh, like I'm interested, but like, I don't want to be a DEI coach. And I'm like, good. I don't want you to be like, 'cause it's not easy, right? Like, and not that I don't want people to be, because certainly there's plenty of work, right? Like that we need to do. But what I want more is for people to do the work that they were put here on this earth to do. And I want them to do it in a way that accounts for identity, for equity, so that they're just doing excellent work.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm going to guess, and I'll just say, I'm in Kara's advanced certification in feminist coaching. I'm one of the guest coaches. And it's a room full of coaches who want to help people. And even I've gone through the course twice because I go through the material with them. And it's like, oh, I still have work to do here. Oh, I still have work to do here. And I'm not going to ever, I have no aspirations to be a DEI facilitator, but there's a lot that I don't know. And I'm okay that I don't know because I'm willing to learn it. And I just like, for those of you who are feeling any kind of resistance or some kind of way right now, like we're not asking you to change your calling. Keep your calling, whatever it is, but just start to look around that there's more humans out there than maybe you're even seeing right now because you have your own set of blinders on.
And I feel very confident to say this because of how many people have just shared their experience integrating this work. When you understand these things, right? When you understand equity, when you understand how identity impacts life and people's life experiences, when you have baseline understanding to hold that kind of space for people and to understand some of these words and concepts a little bit more, you become a better coach. The work that you get to do with your clients is so much deeper. It's very exciting. It's very exciting what people get to do when they start incorporating depth into their skill set.
I agree. 100%. I have a friend who just got diagnosed with ADHD and she was telling me about body doubling, which is something I'd never known about. And I have a client who's struggling with something and she's like, oh, I tried this approach for scheduling and calendaring. It doesn't work for me. And she's been beating herself up horribly. And I don't know what it was, just a connection. I didn't see this part of her because my blinders were on to this. Right. So once I saw it through my friend's lens, I was like, oh, wait a minute. So I offered this client, I said, hey, why don't we just get on calls and we do stuff? I'll be your body double. I think you just need a buddy.
Yeah.
And she the relief on her face was heartbreaking because she didn't know that she could even ask for that.
Right.
She didn't even know that was a possibility. I'm like, Mama, I'm here for you. What do you need? Right?
Exactly.
But I wouldn't have known to even approach the subject because I had those blinders. I wasn't seeing her through that lens. So now I can be a better supporter. I can help her through her next transition, her goal setting much differently than I was doing.
And this is again, a concept that I teach people constantly, this idea that equity, you learn these strategies about diversity, about inclusion, right? About to deepen your skill set. And it doesn't benefit just your clients who happen to have ADHD or happen to be clients of color or happen to be clients who grew up with not a lot of financial resources, but it helps everyone because now you have this tool. And even if you have a client that you don't know if they have ADHD or not, if they're struggling with something similar, you could be like, oh, well, why don't we try this?
Yep.
Right. So it improves the outcomes for all of your clients.
Yeah. And then she has people she serves. So now she can get her work done and go help her humans. And then they're going to help their, that's why the triple effect of this is just delicious. Yes. It's really good. Yeah.
So good.
Okay. So tell us about your book, where we can find it, all the good stuff.
Yes. Grab the book. I tell people that this book is for anyone who has a business, who wants to have a business, who works at a business, who buys things from businesses. This book is literally for anyone who interacts with businesses, especially if you've ever felt like something ain't right, that you don't like, you don't like something about the way that business exists in the world, but you're trying to navigate it anyway. This is a book for you. So it's, part my personal experiences with business and kind of working in the nonprofit industry and transitioning to be a side hustler all the way to full blown business with employees and everything. And part just kind of analysis of the state of business right now, what business is, what capitalism is, different ways to think about capitalism and money and earning. And then there's some really practical applications for how to start creating changes in the businesses that you run, or if you lead teams, or again, if you're planning for, even if you're just a one person show or operation, there are things that you can find super valuable to get you started and to help, grow as you mean to go on.
I love that. I love that. So y'all, we have a special treat for you on the podcast. If you're listening to this podcast outside of, let's say, July 2022, this will probably no longer apply. But if you're listening to the next month or so, the first 3 people who email me, coach@judithgaton.com, and you're just going to put in the subject line, book winner. The first 3 people, we're going to send you a copy of Trudi's book. I want this work to be out in the world. So we want to help facilitate that by creating some ripple effect of our own. So email me, coach@judithgaton, to win your prize. And you just put book winner in the subject line, and we've got you, and we'll send you a copy of your book. And Trudi, thank you so much for being on. I feel like there's so much more we can talk about.
There's so much more. That's okay. Well, I'll come back. We can do one of those other series that you were talking about.
Yes. Oh,
what is
it?
Things
So we call it Shit My Mama Said. And it could even just be like dumb shit you've heard other people say about business. And we could do
I'll come back. Let's make sure that happens.
All right.
Okay.
Deal. All right, y'all. That's what we have for you today. Thank you for listening. I hope the winners, I want to hear from y'all. All right. Thanks, everyone. We are out.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. To learn more about how to work with me, go to judithgaton.com. Click on the Start Here button to get access to my free personal style class. I give you a quick style win, a confidence boost, and you walk away with the tools to start getting stylish. Who doesn't love that? See you there. Miss J out.